Welcome to this special edition of Budget Expectations 101. Today we turn the spotlight on a critical but often overlooked area of India's development story: rural mobility. For years, successive budgets have focused heavily on building rural roads. Schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana have connected lakhs of villages across the country. But experts say that roads without transport do not deliver real mobility. Despite a near doubling of rural road length over the last decade, the availability of affordable public transport in rural India still requires work. As a result, rural households are being forced to spend more on travel. Data shows that conveyance costs have more than doubled as a share of rural household expenditure, putting pressure on low-income families, women, the elderly and students. Now, experts expect Union Budget 2026 to shift its focus from just building roads to funding actual transport services on those roads. The rural mobility sector is seeking a major scale-up of the Ajivika Gramin Express Yojana, currently the only centrally funded scheme dedicated to rural transport services. Industry and policy think tanks want Budget 2026 to transform from a small sub-scheme into a nationwide rural mobility mission, with multi-year funding on the scale of other flagship infrastructure programs. Now, the sector is calling for dedicated budgetary support for shared and demand responsive transport, including minibuses, vans and rural shuttle services that connect villages to markets, schools, hospitals and transport hubs. Experts say that Budget 2026 must also address the regulatory gap by incentivizing states to simplify permit norms and enable formal legal shared mobility in rural areas. There is a strong push for targeted funding to promote women-led transport enterprises, building on the success of self-help group operators under the DAY NRLM. Now, the rural transport sector is also seeking capital support and interest subventions to lower the cost of vehicle ownership and operations, making rural transport services financially viable and affordable. Policy experts want Budget 2026 to recognize rural mobility not as a welfare expense but as a productive economic investment that enables employment, market access and social inclusion. The message from the sector is clear. India has built the roads. Now the budget must invest in movement, access and opportunity for rural India. Let's in fact open up this discussion with panelists who are joining us on the broadcast. Dr. Uday Narang, founder and chairman, Omega Psyche Mobility; Yogendra Kapoor, economist; and Tutu Dhawan, auto analyst. Thank you so much, sirs, for joining us on the broadcast to discuss this very important piece just before the Union Budget 2026. If I can go across first to Dr. Uday Narang regarding this entire scenario that is in front of us. How are you looking at this rural mobility sector, sir, and what all are the expectations from Budget 2026?
First of all, really it's an important day tomorrow as we bring India to become the third largest economy in the world in the very near future. Mobility is one of the most important parts of a country's economy, and what's most important is India and development in tier 2, 3, 4 cities in rural India. The more the mobility, more what we can see, transportations from our farms, transportation from our farms to cities, transportation of people, mobility, that will help in building a very, very strong economic backbone for this country. It is not only about tier 1 cities, it's rural India where the real work is being done. And I think this is where it's important. I am expecting, I'm hoping that the budget puts this in the front. The Indian automobile sector is at an inflection point as we see right now. And obviously the strong domestic demand, improving exports, and a structural transaction is underway. What I do want is a real move towards, in terms of electrification, charging infra. There should be a major move towards setting up charging infrastructure in the rural part of the country. Also, we need to make sure that EV adoption is rising, and we need to make sure that there are real manufacturing facilities being set up, not just in the tier 1 cities, but as we move towards the rural side. I also want to see from the budget a movement towards where GST is reduced from 18% to 5%, and much more towards making more and more rural improvement in terms of financing of vehicles, in terms of providing credit to farmers and others to be able to get more and more mobility in this budget.
Absolutely. In fact, let me also rope in Mr. Rogendra Kapoor on this. Sir, we just have, inputs and reports regarding how much expense has in fact, increased for the rural population, especially the elderly, the students, the women, because of lack of transport services. Do you think that in this budget now the government should focus more on developing these services, on rural mobility more?
Absolutely. You see, I think this budget should primarily focus into ways in which more money can be brought into the hands of the people. Now, you see, there are two ways. One is, of course, that you create innovative schemes where people tend to generate more of your income. The other way is that you create an ecosystem and an environment by giving tax incentives that it reduces the cost for the people, and they end up into more of savings in their hands. Now, the point is that we see that there is a reducing gap in terms of consumption when we look at the goods and services with respect to the urban and the rural position as such. And it's very important that in case you want to reach down the line in the rural sector, then the mobility factor is a very important factor, because ultimately it creates and ends up into either a higher increased cost for the rural people who are living therein, or if a mechanism is built that I would say the system gets created in such a way that it ends up into increased saving in their hands. So I think the focus of the government should be that they need to encourage the small and medium enterprise sector so that they tend to invest more in this sector. And that is only possible that if you provide them with a framework, that you give them tax incentives so that they get encouraged to make investment into this sector. And once they do so, we will see that the effect of it will come down the line, and it will help in the rural sector as such altogether.
Absolutely. Let me also rope in Mr. Dhawan on this. So, how important do you think will be the implementation of last mile connectivity, because that seems to be the missing link that is prevalent over here in our rural scenario? And how critical are these mini bus services or rural shuttles if the government starts, because these are demand responsive services?
See, unfortunately, the government has put a lot of focus on what you can call it, metros and buses and EVs and so on. But the fact is, the last mile connectivity has got the least of importance, or nobody wants to even look at that aspect. With the result, it is totally haphazard. Now, with all these EVs and small three-wheelers that have come, and people from the villages and towns coming here into the cities, into metros, with no discipline of traffic, and also, of course, the culture that they have in the villages, that's the culture they want to bring into the town. With the result, you have so much of chaos and accidents that even the last mile connectivity today is not a 100% solution, for a common person. And one is always on the edge that once you step into it, I hope, we reach our destination without any episode. So the government has to look into this last mile connectivity and get it organized. That is more important now. And of course, they are trying to organize the transportation system by getting in multiple buses, EVs, and metros and so on and so forth. The metro network itself has become very large, especially in a place like Delhi and other metros, big cities. So they are obviously, trying to put the best foot forward. But the thing that is now lacking is the last mile connectivity, and of course the chaos that it gets created in the metro stations and under the metro stations while the passengers are coming in and out.
Absolutely. Dr. Narang, how important do you think is it for the government to look at rural mobility not just as a welfare scheme but as an investment option, because we are looking at jobs creation, we are looking at mobility of women as well?
You're absolutely right. This is extremely important. First of all, 48% of population is the Nari Shakti, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not just about men, but also women in the mobility sector. I think you're absolutely right. We do not want to just build, support. We need to actually make sure that mobility helps in a long-term business, or it works in employment, or it gives them income. And I think this kind of processes, but I'll also tell you this, in my view, it cannot just be a government, it has to be a public-private partnership. There has to be movement, whether it's in Bihar or Uttar Pradesh or rural Tamil Nadu or rural Karnataka. We've got to make sure that these models, these mobility models, these businesses, these employment opportunities are able to bring a long-term financial sustainable business. Then only can we have long-term growth. If you look, and I'm not a fan of China, but if you look at China, look at the infrastructure, look at the mobility, look at the way things have been done in not just the bigger cities, but in rural areas. And I think if we want to improve the standard of living or the per capita, I don't want to just have, be the third largest economy in the world and have a few, people at the top. We've got to be able to lift. And I think with mobility will come healthcare, will come education. And I think this is something that to me is a 10, 15-year plan. We need to work on it every year. And we've got to be able to make sure that rural India, women, and transportation and logistics. Think about how much waste that is happening, how much in terms of grains or losses that are happening because lack of mobility from the farm to the end of the table. So I think this is something that I believe has to be taken, not just at the central level, but also at the state level. And I think the government has to be able to set up a very clear plan for a very long-term future.
Right. So when you speak about, the state level, what changes do you think should come in? Because, there's a talk of permits, the lack of permits, the regulations that are in place, which are very stringent. Do you think there has to be a more symbiotic relationship between the center and the state regarding rural mobility?
Ma'am, you're absolutely right. This has to be a coordinated effort. And I think, please understand, we have an opportunity. India has an opportunity to be, and in the new world order with what's happening between the United States and other parts of the world, it has given us an opportunity. So you're absolutely right. The central government cannot just do it. It has to be a coordination between state level and central level and municipalities. So this has to be a combined, but I also think not only just central and state, but public and private partnerships have to be part of it. And I think the agenda has to be where we are all aligned, where we do not have too many bureaucratic one of the things that's happening is there are so many bureaucratic hurdles. So everybody has to be aligned. We've got to actually put India first and then talk about our own political or agendas. So I think the state involvement, and at the state, the local municipalities, the smaller, it has to be from the top to the bottom if this is going to work. And I'll tell you, we all have to be part of this journey, and it's an extremely important agenda.
Absolutely. In fact, let me rope in Mr. Kapoor on the economics of the whole thing. So it's very, it's very costly to operate services in the rural areas, and if we are looking at more transport based services by the central or the state government, it will incur more costs.
You see, I think we need to understand that at the end of the day, it is that what is relevant is finding solutions to the problems. You see, when the Prime Minister says that the government has no business to remain in business, then it has to get translated from the words into action. And as Dr. Uday rightly said, that the way forward is a public-private partnership model, because therein it can be worked in this manner that the ownership remains with the government, but the day-to-day operational part, as such, it can be always delegated to the private sector. And because once you bring in private sector, we can all depend on the hallmark of efficiency in services, which is very pertinent and relevant. So I think if India has to move forward, then it's very important that the benefit of these measures need to go down the line. And it's very important that also that if you want to bring in private sector, you have to offer them tax incentives to make investment in this sector. So I think the role of the government remains central at the end of the day, that they need to create a framework where it becomes a win-win situation, and the private sector also feels that they need to be a part of the growth story of the nation.
Right. So just a related question to that, sir, do you believe that then there should be more capital subsidies given for vehicle, the vehicle operations that are there, or, more interest subventions that are given for vehicle ownership in the rural transport areas?
Absolutely. You see, what we are looking at is a situation that when it comes to a large corporates or so, they are not ready to invest in this sector. Then it comes down to a situation that small and medium enterprises, they face the problem of credit. And for that, it's very important that the government needs to, government as well as the banks, they need to work on two fronts. Government can help out in giving the subsidies as well as the tax incentives. The banks, they can provide the credit, because then only it has to make a business sense at the end of the day for the private sector. So in case you are looking for a win-win situation, then it has to be a kind of a mechanism where the government as well as the private sector, they both feel the need to create value as such, and then we will see the results on the ground.
Absolutely. Mr. Dhawan, we've got the economics, we're talking about the economics, we're talking about what kind of legislation we need, but there seems to still be that regulatory gap, because there are permit issues, between entry permit issues and a host of other issues that need to be resolved before this can come to fruition.
See, all said and done, I think we need to reorganize our traffic and other systems in the city. Because as you know, there are certain times when you have no entries and you have, heavy vehicles not allowed to come in. And moreover, certain vehicles are not even allowed to go on certain roads. Now, all those systems, once they are in place, only then can you expect, a smooth movement of vehicles into transportation as well as for passengers to be going from one place to the other. So all said and done, we need a holistic review on this entire system of transportation. If you would probably recollect, one or two places in India, one of course is Kota, where they have tried to reorganize their traffic systems and have eliminated all the red lights in the area so that there is no traffic jams, and there are no traffic lights where people would be standing, and the flow is relatively smooth vis-a-vis what we have in places like Delhi and other places. Now, all said and done, it's not necessary that there would be no glitches in that system. I'm sure there are glitches in that system also, but if they are fine-tuned, even that can become a good way of implementing these systems into modern cities and towns.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Dhawan, let me start off with you before I round up this discussion. What are your expectations from the budget 2026 when we are looking at rural mobility?
Well, honestly speaking, today I think the focus is on our great President of the United States, who's been holding the world to ransom, and we are expecting something like that, in response from our government also. Of course, there are not going to be a confrontation, but I'm sure, they would be taking out certain steps which are going to counter his tariff threats and so on.
Right. Dr. Narang, we want the budget to move towards, instead of just building roads, to move towards movement, to move towards opportunity. So, what are your expectations?
Look, my expectations are, as people talk about making America great again, I think India was always great and we can make it even greater. I think the budget has to make sure that we provide long-term policy stability so manufacturers can invest with confidence, and especially in the rural area. We want to remove structural bottlenecks like charging, taxation, and EV financing. And I want, finally, manufacturing opportunities, not just for green initiatives, but manufacturing for mobility in tier 2, 3, 4 cities. India will only be great if we can do two things: make rural India more industrial, more manufacturing, and bring mobility not just to the men, but to the Nari Shakti of this country. And I'm hoping tomorrow's budget has some of that.
All right. Mr. Kapoor, your closing comments regarding your expectations for this budget in the rural mobility sector?
You see, when we talk of the automobile sector, we have to understand that this single sector contributes 7% to our GDP, and in terms of our manufacturing GDP, it comprises of 49%, of the overall manufacturing capacity of the country. So my point is that it's very important that the very sunrise sectors need to be encouraged, and in case the benefit has to reach down the line, then you have to think of innovative ways of ensuring that investment comes into the system. And for that, it's very important that you announce tax incentives, tax breaks for the private sector to come forward and make investment in this.
Absolutely. So I thank all my guests, in fact, for joining us on the broadcast to discuss this very important piece of rural mobility sector regarding the 2026 budget. Ms. Dr. Narang, Mr. Kapoor, and Mr. Dhawan. With that, we are wrapping up this bulletin and slipping into a short commercial.
MD